Hey everyone, welcome back to Elevate Your AIQ, your go-to source for insightful conversations on human-centric AI readiness, talent transformation, responsible innovation, and the future of work. Today I'm reconnecting with an old friend and former IBM colleague, Oded Dubovsky. He's the founder of STRAIX, that's STRAIX, which stands for Strategy for AI Execution, an advisory practice helping organizations navigate their AI adoption journey from foundational infrastructure all the way to intelligent automation. Oded brings a fascinating career arc spanning over 2 decades at IBM Research's Haifa Lab in Israel, where he pioneered early computer vision and cognitive computing solutions, through his applied AI work at Intel, and now guiding companies on building the right AI strategy before chasing any shiny objects. We dig into why 95% of companies are still struggling with AI adoption, the importance of developing responsibly, and why the human role as orchestrator and innovator isn't going anywhere. So get ready for a candid, wide-ranging conversation between two former IBMers who have been living at the intersection of technology, innovation, and organizational transformation for a long time. I think you're really going to enjoy this one, and as always, thank you so much for listening to the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. I am your host, Bob Pulver. With me today, I have the pleasure to catch up with my old friend, Oded Dubovsky. How you doing, Oded? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has. And thank you so much for catching up on a public, what will be a public setting like this. I really appreciate it. You and I caught up recently. I think there was some LinkedIn post that caught both of our attention. And obviously, we've been trying to catch up and hear what everyone's doing in terms of, AI projects and where all of this is going. So, before we get into the details and all those topics, I thought you could just share with my audience just a little bit about your background, up to, the impetus for starting STRAIX.
So first of all, thank you for having me today. And it's a pleasure to be here. Yes, we recently connected through LinkedIn, all sort of things going around AI. And so you also doing some stuff around this area. So I thought, why not reconnecting and hear what you guys are doing. And regarding my experience in the past, so the way I explain that is I come from two big companies, enterprise companies. The first one, I call it my home, is the Blue IBM. And I spent about more than 20 years there. And recently I left Intel, and that was only 4 years. But throughout my career, and that's how it kind of leads me to what I'm doing these days, I passed through IT. I started with IT at the first place for more than 10 years at IBM. And then I kind of transitioned into software engineering because I thought, okay, I need to do something with my master degree, and I want to, I have a lot of interest in software engineering. So I stepped into this field more than 10 years ago, and done that in research as a R&D manager. We're basically doing all sort of stuff, and we talk about it in a few minutes, I guess. And then I transitioned out to Intel because I wanted to do something, I would say, practical with the recent awards that I stepped into, which was computer vision, machine learning, some of the stuff that I've been doing recently. And last April, I got out of Intel, started to look for the next adventure. And since I'm used to transition between things, I thought, okay, what's my next big role? What am I going to do? And I thought, why not connecting the dots between the engineering and the product? Because I think I have the insight of looking at things from the broader angle. And that's what I wanted to bring into the business and into whatever next role that I have. And I came across this opportunity back in September, where they wanted my experience specifically in the AI field. Specifically, all the organization nowadays working with the traditional systems and the automation and the infrastructure and the existing software, they're looking on how to expand it to AI. And with my experience coming from the very bottom of the IT and the infrastructure up to the scale of cloud with the software engineering and stuff, that brings a lot of experience. And now AI is kind of the top level, like the penthouse on top of all of that, which I kind of bring to organizations doing strategy, doing workshops, and guiding them and working with them hand by hand throughout the integration, throughout all these different stages of IT, software engineering and stuff. That's what I'm doing these days.
Wow, that's a lot. That's quite a journey. I didn't realize how closely our our sort of paths more from a chronology standpoint, sort of, matched up. In other words, I spent 22 years at IBM, and then three and a half years at another big enterprise at NBC Universal under the Comcast family of companies, and then went off on my own and went and focused on AI and related technologies, especially as it affects organizations from a talent and HR standpoint, has been sort of my focus. But I think one of the things that you and I have been talking about is there's plenty of other domains and plenty of other areas that need help in terms of understanding how to adopt the right AI technologies. And I use AI very broadly, right? Because we've all noticed that some of this is really just repackaged sort of automation technology, but certainly there's a lot of very advanced, almost scary advanced technologies in this umbrella of AI tools, right? AI is not really, I don't think of it as a tool. It's more of a tool kit, right? Because there's just so many pieces to it. But I wanted to just go back and reflect on some of the IBM stuff that you were doing, because it was pretty advanced at the time. So just fast forwarding to your second decade of IBM experience at IBM Research in the Haifa, Israel Research Lab, a lot of amazing sort of solutions. I mean, some of them maybe never became full-blown, production solutions, but one of the ones that you had built was right after IBM Watson had been introduced to the world, and you, along with many of your research colleagues, had built some amazing, capabilities around computer vision, which, for those who aren't familiar with the inner workings of that, I mean, there were a lot of solutions where we were starting to train machines to recognize, images, shapes, colors, things like that, so that it could identify, objects within an image. And that's everything from, physical security at, sensitive, physical, areas like an airport or government building, all the way down to your more layman's sort of project, which is understanding more about what we as human beings consume. And so your project, literally called "What Did I Eat?", allowed you to basically take a picture of the food on your plate and tell you well, I'll let you describe exactly what it told you. But I mean, this is
16.
2016. Yeah. I mean, pretty advanced stuff a decade ago now, where people are still, fascinated that they can actually do that, and it works with reasonable accuracy. So I thought I'd just let you just explain a little bit about that, and then that sort of sets the stage for how far, we've come with some of the tech.
So let me go back a little bit, because you mentioned Jeopardy, right?
Yeah.
Watson.
Yeah.
Back then, I was in the United States, and I still used to be. I worked on the IT, Watson Research Center, and I do remember the day they had the final show. It was a Friday, and only badge people, special badges, could enter the building, and they had to keep the secret of who won. That this secret was kept for weeks until the show was presented. So there was a whole ceremony around that, and actually Watson was hosted on my data center. So I'm glad to say that, and that was quite fun there. And that was really the initiation of the journey of cognitive, also within IBM. And right after Watson, there was a big contest with Jeannie back then, with Jeannie Romelli, the CEO, and she had a big contest and said, "Okay, everybody, come with an idea related to cognitive. Try to tie this into Watson capabilities." And back then, I still was on the IT side, but there was a team in Israel who suggested this crazy idea: shooting your own plate and obtaining the amount of nutrition, and through that log that through the day. So I know many people are using that for nutrition tracking. there was, I don't know if they're still leading. My Fitness, there was one of the big shots there, and people were just typing in what they ate and how much, and they used it for the daily tracking of nutrition. And the idea was, let's shoot food and shoot a photo of the food and grab the nutrition throughout the day and then have some log around that. So they brought me to run this project. That was the idea was there, and we started this project. So it was really the initiation of the cognitive, world, where basically we had machine learning. We had to teach basically what kind of different foods you had, and the specific food that a person is eating, which is, people are eating, you should think about it, for about 10 different types of foods, but no more. So you could teach your own food and through that log your food throughout the day. There was a lot of enthusiasm around that because we added speech at some time, so you can have a conversation. Could you imagine that? That was before the age of Siri, okay, and Alexa. We had computer vision because I don't know, many of the apps these days, they kind of say, yeah, hey, look what we did, and that's 10 years after. And we also had gesture. So if you ate throughout lunch and forgot to log your meal, then it would trigger, your watch would trigger you that you're using a fork and knife, reminding you to take a picture of your food. That was kind of nagging all the time. So that was quite innovative. All of that was basically machine learning, okay? Understanding language, understanding photos, understanding gestures. And we taught all that was kind of in the backend. And honestly, it was premature, okay? Premature for people to grasp, premature for, I guess, the world to understand the value of that. And that's why I think it didn't really elevate to the next stage of becoming a product. But I guess, from a research point of view, and being at IBM Research in Haifa, that's what research does. They look ahead 5, 6, on this case, I would say 10 years ahead of time, try to innovate. What's the next big thing? I guess it was a little bit too early for that. And that wasn't the only project that we ran. It was a little bit too early for its time. I guess next I dealt also with augmented reality, and glasses are still not out there. There are big talks about it for years, but it's not there. And we've been there also 2018, 2019. So mark my words, in 3 years from now, if they had augmented reality with glasses, we did it back then. Also about 7 years ago. And that's quite innovative. That's the nature of research in that sense. The reason why I shifted over to Intel, by the way, is because what you said, because I wanted to have a product that I know customers would eventually use. So kind of stepped out of research, kept my research kernel, I would say, with the innovation and stuff took it with me over to Intel. That's where I did 3D cameras. So we had deployed 3D cameras, and those cameras basically cameras that estimate the distance between the camera and the object in front of it. And it's used for AMR, autonomous mobile robots. This is seeing navigating at homes and stuff. So this is just one of the use cases that we used. All of that was in the computer vision field over the last decade, I guess. So that's kind of in a nutshell, I would say.
I just feel like people like you and I who are, fascinated with technology and are really trying to innovate. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to take that step back and say, the mass, market or maybe some technologies that, sort of complement, what you're working on aren't ready yet. And so I can imagine it would be a little bit frustrating if, the things you work on just never seem to to make it into production and
You're
commercial
right.
use and things like that.
We were always there, by the way. We did work with in IBM internal products, and like the augmented reality. Okay, sorry, the augmented reality that we did the project during the COVID, people couldn't travel, so we wanted to have like 2 people communicating over a device with the augmented reality, and a technician and an expert. And the expert could point out to a specific location, creating anchor points that were sticking to the object. And no matter how you build your device, it would just stick there. And through that, obtaining guidance on how to fix stuff, because you couldn't fly over the expert to the site. That almost captured. We had that included in IBM Maximo, and it was already, the asset management and the life cycle, and that was included there because it was part of the technician, so to say, treatment, how to handle assets. So, and we captured all of that. We almost made it up, and that kind of broke my spirit, I would say. So,
Yeah, no, it's, when I left, so you went to another big technology company. I left and went to a media company that was trying to be a technology company, and there's a big difference, right? Like I was so spoiled with all of the toys, as I call them affectionately. When I left, the day I left IBM, all my toys were taken away, right? And so
sandbox.
yeah, I mean, it was all the computer vision stuff that the Watson Research Center and Haifa and maybe a few other research centers were working on. It was the social analytics and knowledge graph kinds of solutions for expertise discovery. These things made a big difference in our lives as IBMers. But yeah, you get out into the world, and now it goes back to sort of relationship driven networks, and you've got to know who knows who and who knows what, and to navigate the organization differently and to find other paths to get your ideas, shared and things like that. So it was almost like I went into a little bit of a time warp, back at least, a decade. And so I think people are appreciating, some of that they've appreciated some of it over the years, but I feel like AI these days is just moving so incredibly fast that I don't know, maybe what took a decade for people to sort of recognize and consume as things that you were working on so long ago. I feel like that time horizon has sort of compressed when it comes to AI tools.
You're right, and you're talking about IBM, and I guess also the culture changes, the culture differences between companies is also something that I kind of, after being 20 years.
Hi, I'm Stephen Rothberg.
And I'm Jeanette Leeds.
And together, we're the co-hosts of the High Volume Hiring Podcast.
Are you involved in hiring dozens or even hundreds of employees a year? If so, you know that the typical sourcing tools, tactics, and strategies, they just don't scale.
Yeah. Our bi-weekly podcast features news, tips, case studies, and interviews with the world's leading experts about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to high volume hiring.
Make sure to subscribe today.
In research and IBM, it's a very different culture than what I experienced at Intel, and that's natural. And I guess, like we were talking, and the nature of relationship is something that comes along no matter where you go. So you mentioned that all of a sudden you find yourself in a position that you need to speak to people, find who connects to what. No doubt that was also part of the story that we needed to do at IBM, because at IBM Research, at my time, there was a distribution of all the different projects, even with the cognitive build that we had to do there. You kind of saw crosswalk in between teams and not necessarily the right direction. So it happens, okay, in big companies, and at some point you have to have an alignment, but people relationships is really what matters eventually. That's important. Going to AI, so yeah, AI is dramatically and rapidly developing, and I think back in September, I have from my own personal point of view, I have to admit I haven't touched AI before I left Intel. Okay, and maybe a little bit AI, all the different tools. Yes, I did use ChatGPT. Yes, I touched on some of the tools there, here and there. Of course, I had an experience with the cognitive build and machine learning in the past with the different applications that we had, but not specifically with what we call AI these days, or generative AI these days. And I think what brought me to the realization that it could be a good fit, only talking about 5 months ago, for me, is that I think nowadays I see a lot of companies coming out, consulting, trying to do things with AI, and I think they're missing one big thing, and that's the experience. You mentioned automation, okay? I just had a post these days, just only today, this morning, my time, related to automation. And I explained that automation existed for ages, okay? Those of us who, even batch jobs on the dot bat on Windows that we used to have back then on the 80s and the 90s, okay? Or shell scripts or whoever knows the cron job or Linux, the one that, every once in a while it wakes up, does something, goes to sleep, and everything was conditional. So automation exists for decades, okay? And that's the experience if you start thinking through those eyes of understanding the underneath layer and what leads to what. And then you take the AI, as I mentioned, it's kind of the penthouse for all of that. Like, okay, so now I don't really have to maybe narrow down all the different if then cases because the Gen AI can help me identify the case or what the logs is actually saying and whether or not to send me a notification regarding something that goes wrong. So it's just another flaw. Well, I'm not trying to oversimplify that, but it's basically a flaw that adds a lot of power to what already existed in this area if we're talking about automation. So that's how I look at AI. That's where I came to the realization of my understanding coming from the IT field and then all the software engineering on top of that. And now with the AI brings a lot of value to companies who are basically trying to survive and everybody's saying, okay, we've got to have AI, we've got to have AI. And what's the percentage of the companies who really are mature to use AI in an efficient way? What's the percentage? It's about 5%. 5% of the companies are trying to adopt AI. That's based on research, okay? They really succeed in doing that. 95%, they're just saying, okay, we need AI. But that's why I'm seeing also working with companies these days. You go to a company, they want to have AI, they kind of don't know how to absorb that, how to start using, how to leverage that. No policies, shadow AI, meaning people are using, whatever tool they want to. And you see that across organization, and then they have to start thinking about the policies, what really brings me value, what can I gain in the short run, lowest hanging fruits, then on the medium term, on the longer term. And with the system and the engineering understanding that is carried into those organizations, that's where the real value you can bring the real value to those companies and really start from scratch, understanding the underneath. Basically, I find myself, it's a funny journey because I'm hearing about a lot of problems that I dealt like 10, 15, 20 years ago. Okay. And then the AI. So it kind of brings me back and it's very nice. And I really enjoyed the journey on that end.
So is that the nature of your work with STRAIX, is to sort of help companies sort of take advantage of that sort of technical evolution, but also like the literacy and the readiness to advance, but in a measured sort of way, right? Like everyone, like to your point, everyone says they want AI. Well, okay, that's nice, but like, what's your actual strategy, and how are you even ready? Like maybe there's a data, maturity issue. Maybe there's a people, AI readiness of your people, issue. You can't. This isn't just about IT, right?
It's also IT.
Well, yes.
IT.
Sure.
So STRAIX I chose STRAIX, the name. It's kind of weird, but it's basically strategy for AI execution. Okay. So obtaining eventually the execution and the right results with the right strategy. And what I do in organizations, basically we come to the organization, not all of them are clueless. Okay, you're seeing the organization in different stages, started to adopt AI, try to use AI. People are using other different tools that are not allowed within the company. So first of all, we start with mapping. Okay, understanding what's the pain points, what they're doing these days, what are the tools that you talk coming to mid or large companies or even enterprises, they're obligated to certain tools. Okay, so you have to work around that. So how do you tie together those tools if they exist or recommend on tools and tie them back to the processes, most painful processes that these companies are trying to achieve? Majority of them are looking at internal processes, not even their products. Okay, I did come across companies who were looking to adopt AI and add AI to their products, but the majority, I would say vast majority, are looking at how can I enhance my internal work. Typical use case, help desk support, second level, third level support, processes. Somebody's getting a lot of emails from vendors, and there's a human being sitting on his desk getting that into his email, and by chance he didn't miss that, and he needs to figure out whether all the information is there or not. So all of that, it is automation. But don't forget, it's not just the automation layer. Now the AI is capable of understanding and doing some reasoning around whether this is full, missing information, and that really enhances the automation there. So back to your questions, yes, I'm mapping those capabilities and those requirements, and through that, building them kind of a heat map to what can be achieved on the short run, the medium run, the long term. And then I start to work with their teams to implement that into their organization. So that's kind of the model that what we do.
Yeah, it reminds me of some of the work that I did at NBC Universal when it comes to like automation strategy, right? Like I was almost like an internal, gig worker going around to these different teams saying, let's talk about it wasn't AI readiness at the time. It was just like automation readiness, meaning where are your bottlenecks in this group? Where are the friction points? Are there things that we can simplify across some of your workflows and your processes, whether that's within your domain or cross domain things, things that have to go through, procurement or things, whatever it is. And that was one of the key sort of premises. Like, we're not going to go in and just start applying, not even like just plain robotic process automation, like you were saying, like the, if then statements, all the conditional things, but, even some intelligent automation where there was some actual logic that went beyond that. It could, maybe understand certain contexts and things like that and take action. But the point was, you have to have your foundation in place. You don't want to automate a cumbersome, complex, process if it could be simplified first. And I feel like the people that missed that whole wave of automation and are now trying to apply AI, people are going to be anxious to see returns on these bigger investments, but you're going to wind up spending more money and incurring more risk if you haven't done some of those initial steps, because otherwise you've got AI, you're kind of just making it even more complex and more expensive to fix if things go wrong, if you haven't done some of those foundational pieces.
So if you look at the existing tools that exist these days, we're talking about automation specifically. There are lots of tools like 88 and 88. Sorry, Nathan. It's a short name. Yeah, and there's also Make. Okay, so and there are many more. But what it does for many of the people who I'm seeing stepping into the automation world with AI, it kind of simplifies the automation by creating kind of a block chart for programming. So it's a kind of a high level programming language for automation. Now adding the AI layer. That makes it possible for lots of people to create automation. So to say, even without this previous experience of automation, it kind of resembles me reminds me of, what vibe coding and AI-assisted coding, how these transitions non-coders to start developing their own applications and websites or whatsoever without having the experience or coding even just a single line of code throughout their entire life. So that kind of simplifies those tools also for the automation. Now, what I do think is that, of course, I think there's an advantage seeing this and having this experience and understanding what's underneath the surface of the automation. And if you have to tweak one off and what needs to be done and how it works, this understanding or the understanding of complexity or how things are either simple to implement or not, those things are coming with the experience. And so it's not just a matter of implementation, but it's also a matter of understanding the root cause, seeing the entire path, and providing the right and the most efficient solution when it comes to either automation or coding whatsoever.
So when you talk to clients, your first step is a discovery process around, what they're doing now, where the opportunities are. Like you said, the heat map would show you, what's simple versus, difficult, and then, investment level and things like that. And then I suppose like some level of, readiness is part of the math there as well. On the human side, I mean, have you found that people are like anxious to jump in, or are they nervous? I'm just curious where the people sit, the mindset of people and the readiness. I guess what I call I talk a lot about human centricity on the show. Like, is a human centric AI readiness, does it match or not match like the process, readiness?
So typically, when you come to organizations, you'd see people who are anxious about doing stuff with AI. They already have the experience. They did some stuff with AI already. I would say it's less than 50% for sure. Okay. I would say 40, 30%. Those are the amount of people that I typically see getting their hands dirty with doing AI. I think there's that you mentioned that before. There's something scary around the notion of AI. How do I step in? What's the first thing that I do? What are the capabilities? Not everyone keeps the pace, right? And we're seeing it all over the place. Every day there are new news about something new, and it's hard to catch up on everything. But then again, if you really focus on what you need, that's one thing, and find it's not a matter of which tool to use, but the capability, because many tools are providing similar capabilities these days. But so I'm not recommending on one tool or another, but it's about what you need to do, and just make the leap of to really start leveraging the AI capability. And that's what. By the way, it's kind of surprising. I work with software engineers a lot on the workshops. I'm running a hands-on workshop. Recently, I did one of the companies. Only a few of the developers were leveraging AI for coding. Okay, and I would think about it. Cloud exists for about 2 years or so, and it really kind of I think that's really the ancestor of everything we call these days for the vibe coding and the AI-assisted coding, and later on with Codex and Cursor and whatever tool that people are using for writing code. And those folks were scared. They never touched AI. And what I do through the workshop is, I kind of taught them the process. Let's get your hands dirty with doing some of the stuff with AI. So it's not very simple and very basic. And surprisingly well, a day after, the director of that team came to me and he called me and said, "Listen, I can't believe it. Majority of the team just started to use that instantly. They just got it." Okay. And so really the point is, there's a certain point that you really have to just simply take the courage to cross the line and try to start using AI. I think it's a hell of a journey. I had somebody, I've been on a talk, and he gave some good advice about AI. Come back being a child again.
What does it really take to lead with impact in today's ever-evolving world? Welcome to Inside the C-Suite, the podcast where influence, energy, innovation, and empathy converge. Hi, I'm Christy Honeycutt, your host. Join me as I sit down with the boldest voices in leadership, visionaries who are not just making decisions, but making a difference. In every episode, we explore the heart of leadership. How do high-performing leaders harness their energy? How do they lead with empathy without losing their edge? How do they turn disruption into innovation and pressure into purpose? You'll hear unfiltered stories of adversity, resilience, and the raw moments that shaped true influence. This isn't about perfection. It's about presence, passion, and the energetic exchange that fuels transformation. Inside the C-Suite is your invitation to lead from a deeper place, with intention, connection, and courage. If you're ready to go beyond the surface and unlock what really moves leaders to action, hit subscribe and step inside. You can find us wherever you get your podcast fix. Inside the C-Suite, well, we're an energetic exchange. Let's lead with influence, live with energy, and create with empathy.
Okay. Every day, just pick one thing on AI. Do a photo, create an application. Okay. Just imagine and make it happen. And give your imagination, explore any direction, find what, gives you something funny or fun to do with, and deal with that. It's here to stay. That's for sure. How it evolves, nobody can tell. But it's definitely something that I think everybody have to go through this scary line, go beyond this brick wall, and start leveraging that. I think personally, I had this journey myself, and once I crossed the lines, I couldn't go back.
I think it's partly around the overwhelm for the average person. Because it's not just the speed at which things are advancing. I mean, I was just on Reddit last night reading about these AI agents that formed their own social network, right? Like this is scary. I mean, some of the comments, I mean, taken verbatim from the network. Apparently humans can observe these conversations. You just can't post or comment or interact, but we can see it. There's some funny, but also some very scary things happening. Like agents are literally talking about us.
Yeah, well, I tell you one thing, okay? I can't envision what's coming ahead of us and how AI is going to evolve, but it's right now it's all programmatically, okay? It's, everything is going through statistics and models and, closed words, and it looks like they're kind of talking about us and what's the reasoning there, and whether there's really a thinking model behind the scenes that is really, becoming a reality there. But here's an example of something that I recently did, also on the workshops that I mentioned for software engineers. I created a team, okay? Since I've been working for several months on my own, I created a virtual team with a software team lead, developers, validation team, architecture, my own software development team, R&D team. There's one entity or one agent that couldn't replace the human being. And that's, I call it either the CTO or the CEO, whoever brings the idea, brings the idea of the innovation. Maybe at some point, AI could become innovative, make ideas, develop that on his own. But nowadays, the person is the orchestrator, and he's sitting there in the middle, orchestrating the agents. And yes, you can build a lot of helpers. Okay, you can observe them, but still, you do have to control in what you are bringing it to reality. You bring the ideas, and I haven't seen the AI actually doing that. So that's something that I don't see how it's going to change in the sense of, yeah, they have ideas. Okay, you can think about what's new, what's innovative. Okay, but I don't know if that's something that could become really a reality in the sense of replacing that as well.
So it's interesting that you bring that up. First of all, I think it's really important that you did, and I want to dig into that a little bit more. But it's also timely because I have an upcoming conversation with another guest talking about not just human centricity, but like how can we measure human ingenuity? Like, can you measure a human being's, it's almost like a measure of their own originality so that you don't get stuck and pulled into, I guess some people think AI can come up with things, but they don't have the most, novelty to them. And that's really like, we want to hope that remains like a truly human, characteristic, that in terms of our curiosity and our lived experiences create the conditions for that originality, and that on top of having a supervisory role and an orchestration role over these agents and sub-agents and things like that, the originality which drives the innovation, we all hope that remains sort of human attributes, right?
That's a human attribute, I think, these days for sure. Okay. One more thing that you mentioned is the orchestration, because again, if I go back to the engineering world, software engineering. So if you came to an office with a typical software engineer sitting at his desk 5 years ago, majority of the time was spent on coding. Okay. And that's obvious. Okay. You were quickly thinking through things, and then you were doing, most of the work was really coding. And nowadays with AI assisted coding and vibe coding, this really reduces to almost nothing from your work, and that brings the volume and the kind of centric mechanism over to the thinking prior to programming and the architecture and the orchestration, and then to, I would say, testing verification of the results. So it kind of brings the loop out to the human beings to do really the thinking work, the architecture work, understanding that really what I wanted is what I got eventually. I tell programmers that they should think like, next, after the workshop next, tomorrow when you come to the office, think about that. You just got a promotion. You're a team lead. Okay. And now you have hundreds or 1,000 of employees, and you don't micromanage them. You give them the bigger picture, but you have to orchestrate that in the right way in order to make it efficient. And that orchestration and that role is something that people possess. And I think overall, you're seeing that no matter where, on each of the fields, just touch on the on software engineering specifically, but I think it's on any different field that people are doing these days.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think about, just leaning into the not just human centricity, but like the responsible AI, pieces of this. I think I want people to experiment, and I want them to get comfortable. I absolutely do. But part of understanding AI is being responsible by design, not just responsible use. So if you buy into the premise, which of course you do, that everyone can be a builder now. I mean, you and I were doing that 10 years ago, right? I mean, we have the T-shirts, right, from the IBM Cognitive Build. Like, I am a builder, I think it says. So if everyone can now, vibe code, and they can jump into N8N and make and automate their stuff, and they can do all these things, what's going to differentiate, real solutions that can actually scale beyond, a pilot or just a quick, test in Lovable or Base 44, one of these vibe coding apps is where are you getting your data? Do you understand where to get, sort of trusted data? Do you understand some of the foundational elements that relate to, I guess, not building another shiny object or not getting into trouble because you scraped, data without a license and without authorization or whatever. Like, I just feel like there's a lot of things being created now where people they're so anxious to experiment and get their hands dirty. They're not thinking about the risks and where you weren't exercising, concern and thought and fairness and some of these, important considerations when you built it. You just wanted to see what it could do. But at some point you have to learn those things, right? And I always go back to the cognitive build program at IBM. You and I both led, teams through that exercise before, we crossed paths and were part of that entrepreneurial, community. But I still feel like that whole program was really valuable, whether you're at a big organization or you find some modified version to do at a smaller organization. But learn what this is all about, learn what AI can do, should do, and then what ideas do you have in your own life, in your own work, of how this could potentially solve those problems. And then you basically have seeded this portfolio of potential ideas that actually have promise, and you've been responsible by design because you have that type of AI literacy right from the beginning, instead of just people just creating a bunch of shiny objects that are just going to create chaos.
So I would just say what you're saying is basically develop with responsibility. That's basically what you're saying, and that
Do it right the first time.
Do it right.
Yeah.
So that's a notion. I think, coming from the software engineering field, it's not like you are being taught on what's a responsible behavior for developing a software. Yes, you're talking about security, you're talking about data. Okay, so of course those things you do touch, and those problems on how to deal with them. You it's being taught, but the experience is it's really what matters. And you mentioned some of the tools related to Lovable, for example, and I do make the difference between vibe coding and AI assisted coding, because I think when you're talking about Lovable, for example, although it started to change recently, with they just added recently plan mode, okay, which kind of resembles the architecture thinking of how am I going to do things. Before that, you would just push a prompt and meet your software towards the end without your data being exposed, the user exposed or not. It would take some of the things under consideration for sure, but not necessarily the way that you would think as, I would say, security or GDPR, for example, whatsoever that you need to take under consideration when you are developing an application. So when you're doing things on an AI-assisted way, so to say, you're still keeping the architecture in your hands. And what I'm trying to teach people, even not developers, is to think through those stages of how to do careful development. And by the way, even that, it's so to say, you don't really need to invent yourself or to know yourself nowadays, and that's part of what I'm doing on a course a class that I'm just about to launch next week. I created those either gems or GPTs for the different entities that I was talking about earlier, for the architects, for the product person, and I give them these personas and all the descriptions of how I want things to be done right. And people who are leveraging those GPTs or gems, or projects that if they work with that, they get those guardrails around when they start developing. So those prompts that are eventually sent over to either Lovable or the assisted coding, they are sort of protected to a certain degree, even though you haven't touched, a single line of code before. So that's important. You can leverage AI also to not even saying teach you, but to enforce the mechanism of either architecture or security or whatsoever that you just mentioned that is related to how you write the application in a right, scalable, production-ready way. Those kind of things you have to build your AI and leverage it in order to build it right. And that's possible these days. So it's only a matter how, if you're going through these phases. That's why I teach, by the way, lots of teams to leverage these capabilities together.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing. And I guess I think about it in terms of even some of the basics, not to get into like, prompting and some of the specifics, but really just are you looking at this through, that architectural thinking? How do I need to sort of organize things, and then what am I missing, right? So part of this goes back to something that you probably share with folks all the time, as I do, which is you shouldn't just quickly, prompt or do one shot, prompting or whatever. There's got to be some finesse, but also you should be thinking about what am I not thinking about, right? Like use the AI not just to do the execution of specific, components of whatever it is you're building, but think, ask it to be, a contrarian sort of viewpoint on what it is you're building. Like, what am I missing? What else should I be aware of? You've got to ask better questions. And some of those questions are almost acknowledging that you don't know everything. And so there must be something that you're overlooking. What else do I need to know? I want to build this app, and here I am learning how to, use Lovable and maybe one other thing, but here's what I'm trying to do, end to end. So before I get too far, tell me what else I need to know, what other tools I might need, what that's going to cost me, and then can you visually maybe show me how all these things fit together so I understand what my new, process, what my new workflow is going to look like, and then I can just I can be a more informed and responsible
Indeed.
sort of builder, right?
Indeed. And that's exactly, it brings me to, I think, one important kind of finish line, I would say, that I typically quote from Einstein. Okay. And he's saying if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. All right. So that's really the idea. Nowadays, that's what we need to do, because we don't implement the implementation. AI is doing a lot of the work for us on many things. What we need to do as human beings is think a lot, plan a lot, do the architecture, and then spend majority of the time, as Einstein said, 95% of the time for that, to do it right. And if you do it right, then you end up with the right results.
So slow down to speed up.
Exactly.
No, I love it. Oded, this has been awesome. We could easily talk for another hour, but I'm going to be respectful of your time. It's evening already in Israel. So thank you so much for spending all this time with me and sharing your insights. I will definitely include your profile and a link to STRAIX in the show notes. Anything exciting coming up that we should know about? Any closing thoughts?
First of all, I'm open to share ideas and share my experience. Also, since I worked also in the United States, I still got close relation working with people there. So I'd be honored to work with whoever thinks that would be a good opportunity for them to how to start leveraging AI in the right way. So you have my contact point, and looking forward to it.
Thanks again, Oded. Great to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you too.
Thanks everyone for listening. We will see you next time.